Today, thrifting is everywhere. It's in our TikTok feeds, our weekend plans, our favorite influencers' wardrobes. What used to be considered a last resort or a hidden corner of the retail world has now become a booming, even fashionable part of how people shop. But the rise of thrifting isn't just a trend, it's a window into how our culture has changed. To understand why thrifting has become so popular, we need to look at its past, its evolution, and the many forces economic, environmental, and social that brought it to the mainstream. Let's go back. Thrift stores in the US have roots in the late 1800s and early 1900s, with organizations like the Salvation Army and Goodwill opening stores to sell donated goods. These early thrift stores weren't just about selling secondhand items. They were part of a larger mission to help the poor and provide job training. At the time, secondhand clothing didn't have the cool factor it might carry today. In fact, used clothing was often looked down on, associated with poverty or desperation. In a country that was developing fast and increasingly obsessed with cleanliness, order, and middle-class respectability, buying someone else's used belongings could seem embarrassing or even unsanitary. But thrift stores served a purpose. They helped low-income families find affordable goods. They kept items in circulation instead of sending them to the trash. And over time, especially during times of economic struggle like the Great Depression in the 1930s or wartime rationing in the 1940s, thrift stores became lifelines for many Americans. They weren't fashionable, but they were necessary. After World War II, however, things changed. America entered a new age of mass consumerism. The economy boomed, suburbia expanded, and the rise of television advertising pushed new products into every home. Shopping malls took over. Clothing became cheaper to produce thanks to synthetic fabrics and global supply chains. People bought more and threw away more. The stigma around secondhand goods grew even stronger during this time. The message was clear: if you could afford to buy new, you should. Used goods were for people who couldn't. Still, thrift stores persisted. They were part of the background of American life. And by the 1970s, they started attracting a new kind of customer. Young people, especially those involved in countercultural movements, began turning to thrift stores not just out of necessity, but as a form of rebellion. They rejected fast fashion before it was called that. They wanted unique looks, non-mainstream styles, and cheap ways to express themselves. Vintage denim, oversized jackets, funky prints, and worn-in boots became fashion statements. Wearing old clothes wasn't shameful, it was cool. And it told the world you weren't just following the rules. In the 1990s and early 2000s, thrift culture bubbled under the surface, especially among musicians, skaters, punks, and people involved in the alternative scene. But it still was not a part of the mainstream. Most people still saw thrifting as something other people did. Students, artists, or people on a budget. And then, something shifted. In the 2010s, a wave of change hit the retail world. Social media exploded. The fast fashion industry reached new heights with stores like H&M, Zara, and Forever 21 producing new collections weekly. But alongside this came a rising awareness of the environmental cost of all that clothing. Documentaries and news reports began revealing just how much waste the fashion industry creates. People learned that fast fashion relies on cheap labor, contributes to pollution, and produces tons of discarded clothing every year. Suddenly, the public conversation started to change. Secondhand shopping wasn't just quirky or cost-saving, it was sustainable. At the same time, the rise of platforms like Instagram, Depop, Poshmark, and later TikTok made thrifting look exciting, modern, and creative. Thrifting hauls became a trend. Influencers styled vintage finds in high-fashion ways. Suddenly, the thrift store wasn't a place of last resort, it was a treasure hunt. You weren't just buying used clothes, you were discovering hidden gems. A whole generation grew up seeing thrifted clothes not as leftovers, but as collectibles. Then came Gen Z, digital natives raised during economic uncertainty and a growing focus on ethics. For them, thrifting wasn't just a fun activity, it became a social choice. Thrifting meant rejecting waste, fighting overproduction, and embracing uniqueness. It meant finding your style without copying trends. It also helped that thrifting was affordable, especially in a time when inflation and student debt were making life more expensive. COVID-19 only accelerated the trend. When stores shut down and people were stuck at home, many cleaned out their closets, donated to thrift stores, and turned to online secondhand markets to shop. With traditional retail disrupted, more people discovered how easy and fun thrifting could be. The pandemic also made people reflect on their habits, values, and how much stuff they really needed. As the world reopened, thrifting wasn't just back, it was booming. By now, thrifting has hit nearly every corner of pop culture. Thrift flips, where people upcycle or rework old clothes, are all over TikTok. Fashion magazines run features on the best secondhand clothes. Even celebrities are wearing vintage outfits on red carpets. And online resale sites have become billion-dollar businesses. Thrifting has gone from a niche activity to a major part of how people shop today. But what makes this all so interesting is that it represents a deep cultural shift. For most of the 20th century, America pushed the idea that new is better. That progress meant constant buying, replacing, upgrading. Thrifting challenges that mindset. It says that old can be beautiful, that reuse is powerful, and that creativity matters more than cost. It pushes back against throwaway culture and makes style personal again. It also reflects the reality of our times. In an age of financial stress, people want to look good without breaking the bank. And in an age of algorithms and mass trends, people want to stand out, not blend in. Thrifting offers all of that. Still, the rise of thrifting isn't without its complications. As secondhand shopping becomes more popular, prices at thrift stores have gone up in some places. Some critics worry that the trend has made it harder for low-income shoppers to find affordable basics. Others point out that resale platforms can turn thrifting into a kind of business, where people buy cheap items just to flip them for profit. Like any trend, thrifting has its pros and cons. But at its heart, it remains a powerful shift in how we think about clothing, consumption, and culture. Thrifting today is about more than just saving money. It's about expressing identity, supporting sustainability, and making choices that feel more in tune with our values. It blends creativity, history, and conscience. It tells a story, not just about what we wear, but about who we are. So whether you're flipping through racks at your local Goodwill, browsing Depop for that perfect vintage tee, or reworking an old pair of jeans into something new, you're part of a much bigger movement. A movement that honors the past, shapes the present, and maybe even points toward a more thoughtful future. Thrifting isn't just a fashion statement anymore, it's a cultural one. Like, comment, and subscribe for daily history and culture content.